When struggling waitress Sheila MacDonald gets trapped in an elevator with Manhattan's most ruthless billionaire. Christian Kane, she never expected her explosive confrontation to change both their lives forever. What starts as a moment of pure rage becomes the beginning of a dangerous game of power, vulnerability, and unexpected love. Calling all love story lovers, today's episode will melt your heart and maybe even bring a tear to your eye. Ready? Let's begin. Asterisk, the elevator's mirrored walls reflected Sheila MacDonald's exhaustion and brutal high definition. Fourth interview this week, fourth inevitable rejection, waiting to crush what remained of her spirit. The worn folder in her hands threatened to spill resins across the polished floor of Manhattan's most intimidating financial tower. Each paper a testament to her mounting desperation. 28 years old and drowning in a city that ate dreams for breakfast. The electronic voice announced the 30th floor with mechanical indifference, and that's when he stepped inside. Christian Kane, not Christine Jones from some fantasy, but the real predator whose face graced Forbes covers like a beautiful warning. 33 years of calculated ruthlessness wrapped in an Armani suit that cost more than most people's cars. The elevator's atmosphere shifted instantly. 7 other passengers pressed themselves against the walls as if proximity to Kane might contaminate them with his particular brand of corporate poison. Even the air conditioning seemed to hush in reverence or fear. Kane's fingers moved across his phone screen with surgical precision, probably dismantling someone's life between text messages. His presence filled the small space like smoke, suffocating and impossible to ignore. Sheila had read about him in business journals during her night school classes. The man who turned family legacies into tax write-offs, who spoke of human displacement, with the same emotional detachment others reserved for weather reports. Then the elevator died. The lights flickered once before settling into an ominous hum. The display screen flashed red error codes like a digital scream. 8 strangers suddenly found themselves suspended in a metal coffin, 200 feet above the unforgiving streets of Manhattan. What the hell? Kane's voice cut through the stunned silence, his thumb jabbing the emergency button as if he could intimidate machinery into submission. Easy there, son. Jenkins, the building's weathered security guard, spoke with the calm of someone who'd seen every variety of human panic. Happens more than you'd think. Maintenance'll have us out in 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Sheila's stomach dropped faster than the broken elevator should have. Her interview was in 10 minutes. Her last shot at avoiding the humiliating retreat to her parents' house in Albany, where failure would taste like her mother's disappointed sighs and her father's silent judgment. But Kane was having his own meltdown, his composure cracking like expensive veneer under pressure. 15 minutes? I have a $40 million acquisition meeting in 10 minutes. Do you people understand what $40 million means? Everyone knows what you're worth. Mrs. Patterson's voice carried decades of New York attitude. The elderly woman from the 12th floor had probably watched this building rise from nothing. Had seen men like Kane come and go like expensive seasons. You're the one who threw the Santos family out of their apartment last month. Kane's response came without a heartbeat of hesitation. Business is business. Something ignited in Sheila's chest, a heat that had nothing to do with the elevators. Stifling air. Business. The word tasted like acid. You evicted a family with 3 children 2 days before Thanksgiving. For the first time since entering the elevator, Kane looked directly at her. His eyes were the color of Arctic ice, calculating her worth in real time and finding her account severely overdrawn. And you are? His tone could have frozen summer. Some bleeding heart with a savings account that wouldn't cover my lunch. Let me guess. Art student? Environmental activist? Crystal healer? The elevator's tension ratcheted tighter than a violin string about to snap. The other passengers watched like spectators at a gladiator match, sensing blood in the air. Shh. Felt her composure shatter like cheap glass. I'm a waitress. I work 2 jobs to pay for night school and business administration. And even making minimum wage, I wouldn't steal the roof from over children's heads to buy another yacht. 5th yacht, Kane corrected with automatic precision, as if accuracy in his obscene wealth was somehow important. 5th, the number, hit her like a physical blow. You have 5 yachts while people freeze on the streets 2 blocks from here? His smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Welcome to capitalism, sweetheart. That's when Sheila's carefully maintained control exploded into fragments. You know what you are? You're insane. Completely, utterly insane. What kind of human being collects yachts like toys while families sleep in their cars? You're not a businessman. You're a sociopath in an expensive suit. The elevator fell into the kind of silence usually reserved for graveyards and confessionals. Even the building's ambient sounds seemed to hold their breath. Kane stared at her as if she'd just declared war on physics itself. Nobody spoke to Christian Kane that way. Fortune 500 CEOs stammered in his presence. Politicians returned his calls before their wives. And this waitress, this nobody from nowhere, had just called him insane in front of witnesses. He began, his voice carrying the promise of destruction. I what? Why? Sheila crossed her arms, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her chin raised in defiance. Going to sue me for speaking the truth? Before Kane could respond, the elevator shuddered back to life with a mechanical groan. The doors slid open on the 35th floor like curtains rising on a tragedy. My floor, Kane said, his voice carrying the weight of unfinished business. He stepped out but turned back, his ice-blue gaze pinning her to the wall like a specimen. What's your full name? Sheila swallowed hard but refused to show weakness. Sheila MacDonald. Sheila MacDonald. He repeated it like he was carving it into stone. We'll be seeing each other again very soon. The doors closed on his retreating figure, and the elevator erupted in nervous whispers and exchanged glances. Girl Jenkins shook his head slowly. You just went and kicked the devil. In his expensive shoes? Sheila leaned against the cool mirror, her legs suddenly unreliable. Her phone buzzed with incoming doom. The message from her interviewer was brief and brutal. Position has been filled. Thank you for your interest. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. After she'd verbally eviscerated the most powerful man in Manhattan, Sheila closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. She had the sinking feeling that her life had just taken a hard left turn into very dangerous territory. The most terrifying part was the tiny, treacherous corner of her mind that had found those blazing blue eyes absolutely thrilling. Sheila's apartment in Queens looked even more depressing after her encounter with obscene wealth. The radiator wheezed like an old man climbing stairs, and the single window offered a view of a brick wall so close she could touch it. She sat on her second-hand couch, surrounded by rejection letters that had multiplied like a paper virus across her coffee table. 48 hours since the elevator incident, 48 hours of radio silence from the employment universe. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, Sheila MacDonald. The voice was crisp, professional, carried the kind of authority that made people straighten their posture automatically. Yes, my name is Marcus Webb. I represent Christian Kane's interests. Mr. Kane would like to offer you a position. Sheila's blood turned to slush. A position doing what? Cleaning his yachts. Webb's laugh held no warmth. Assistant to the CEO. Salary of $200,000 annually. Full benefits. Company housing in Manhattan. You start Monday. The number hit her like a physical blow. $200,000. More money than she'd seen in her entire life combined. Enough to pay off her student loans, help her parents with their medical bills, maybe even save something. For the future she'd been dreaming about since she was 16. What's the catch? She managed. Mr. Kane believes in second chances, Miss MacDonald. He was impressed by your passion. It's passion, right? Because calling someone a sociopath was apparently a valuable job skill in Kane's world. I need time to think about it. You have until tomorrow at 9 a.m. The offer expires then. The line went dead. Sheila stared at her phone, her mind racing. This was either the opportunity of a lifetime or the beginning of her personal apocalypse. Maybe both. She walked to her kitchen window and looked out at the glittering lights of Manhattan in the distance. Somewhere in that forest of glass and steel, Christian Kane was probably planning her destruction with the same methodical precision he used to dismantle companies. But $200,000? The next morning, Sheila stood in front of Kane Industries' towering headquarters at 8:59 a.m., wearing her only decent suit and a knot of dread in her stomach. The building stretched upward like a monument to human ambition, all gleaming glass and sharp angles that seemed designed to make visitors feel insignificant. The elevator ride to the 50th floor felt like ascending to Judgment Day. Kane's office was exactly what she'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a godlike view of the city. Furniture that probably cost more than most people's homes, and an atmosphere of barely contained power that made the air itself feel expensive. Christian Kane sat behind a desk, the size of her apartment's bathroom, reading something on his computer screen with the kind of focus that suggested someone's financial future hung in the balance. He didn't look up when she entered. "Punctual," he said finally, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "I appreciate punctuality in my employees. I haven't said yes yet." I know he looked at her, and she was struck again by the unsettling intensity of his gaze. Up close, in the harsh morning light streaming through his windows, she could see the fine lines around his eyes. Evidence that even sociopaths aged like everyone else. "No, but you're here, which means you need this job more than—" "You hate me." He leaned back in his chair, and she caught a glimpse of something that might have been amusement in his expression. "Hate is useful, Miss MacDonald. It keeps people honest. Is that what this is about? You want someone around who hates you?" Kane stood and walked to his windows, his hands clasped behind his back like a general surveying a battlefield. "Want someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth? Do you know how rare that is in my world? Everyone I meet wants something from me. Money, connections, favors. They tell me what they think I want to hear. So you're hiring me as your personal truth teller?" He turned to face her, and for a moment she thought she saw something almost vulnerable in his expression. "Almost. I'm hiring you because you looked me in the eye and called me insane. And because you were right." The admission hung between them like a loaded weapon. Sheila felt the ground shift beneath her feet, as if the conversation had suddenly veered into uncharted territory. Right about what? Kane moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive and complex that probably had a name she couldn't pronounce. About the yachts, about the families, about all of it. Her breath caught. "Then why do you do it?" "Because I'm very good at it, and because the alternative is much worse." His voice carried a weight that suggested stories she couldn't even imagine. "You'll learn that about me, Miss MacDonald. I don't do anything without a reason." Before she could respond, Kane returned to his desk and pressed a button on his phone. "Marcus, send up Miss MacDonald's employment contracts. She's accepting our offer." "I haven't said yes," Sheila protested. Kane's smile was sharp as broken glass. "You're about to." And despite every rational instinct screaming at her to run, despite the voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like her mother warning her about men who smiled like predators, Sheila found herself nodding. "Good," Kane said, settling back into his chair. "Your first assignment is dinner with me tonight. 8 p.m. I'll have my driver pick you up." "That's not appropriate. I'm your employee." "Miss MacDonald," Kane's voice dropped to that dangerous register she remembered from the elevator. "You haven't begun to understand what appropriate means in my world." As if summoned by dark magic, Marcus Webb appeared with a stack of contracts, thick enough to qualify as literature. Sheila stared at the papers, knowing that signing them would change everything. $200,000. Chance at the life she'd been fighting for since she was 18, but in a front row seat to whatever game Christian Kane was playing. She picked up the pen, and with each signature felt like she was signing away more than her employment freedom. The restaurant was the kind of place where silence cost extra, and privacy was a luxury measured in hundreds per hour. Sheila had never eaten anywhere with tablecloths worth more than her monthly rent.
Where waiters moved. Where waiters moved like well-trained dancers.
And the wine list read like a graduate thesis in pretension. Christian Kane sat across from her, looking perfectly at home in this temple of culinary intimidation. He'd changed from his business armor into something more casual, but no less expensive. A charcoal sweater that probably cost more than her security deposit. "You're uncomfortable," he observed, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "I'm fine." Sheila pushed her food around her plate, hyper-aware that every bite probably cost more than her usual daily food budget. "Lying already? Tear?" "I thought I was hiring someone who valued honesty." She set down her fork with more force than necessary. "Fine, I'm uncomfortable." This place, this dinner, this whole situation feels like an elaborate setup for something I don't understand yet. Kane's smile held genuine approval. Better. Much better. The waiter materialized beside their table like a well-dressed ghost, refilling wine glasses with practiced invisibility. Kane waited until they were alone again before speaking. "Tell me about your father." The question hit her like cold water. "Excuse me, your father? You mentioned your parents when you were rejecting my offer? I'm curious." Sheila's hand tightened. Around her wine glass, "He's a mechanic in Albany. It's been for 30 years. Why? Because you have the same look in your eyes that he probably had when the factory closed and put half his customers out of work." Kane's voice was casual, but his gaze was anything but. The look of someone who's watched good people get crushed by forces beyond their control.
Yes.
She stared at him, unsettled by the accuracy of his observation. Her father had indeed worked, himself nearly to death trying to keep his small shop running after the local manufacturing plant shut down. She'd watched him age 10 years in one, seen the light go out of his eyes as customers disappeared and bills piled up.
Ow.
Could you possibly know that? Kane leaned back in his chair, swirling wine in his glass like liquid amber. "Because I make it my business to know everything about people who interest me, and you, Miss MacDonald, have become very interesting." "Have you been investigating me?" "Of course." His admission was delivered with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to justify his actions. Sheila MacDonald. Born in Albany, New York, father owns McDonald's Auto Repair, which has been struggling since the Hudson Valley Industrial Complex closed 3 years ago. Mother was a teacher until budget cuts eliminated her position. You moved to New York City at 18 with $700 and a scholarship to community college. Each fact felt like a violation, a reminder of how small and transparent her life was to someone with Kane's resources. You worked your way through school waiting tables, graduated with a business degree last year, applied to 47 companies in the past 6 months, received 47 rejections. Kane paused, studying her face. You send money home to your parents every month, even though you can barely afford to eat. Sheila felt exposed, as if he'd stripped away her clothes and left her shivering in the restaurant's climate-controlled air. "Stop." "Why?" "Because it's too personal. Because it makes you feel vulnerable." Kane leaned forward, his voice dropping to that intimate register that made her pulse quicken against her will. "Vulnerability is just honesty wearing different clothes. Is that what this is? Some psychological game to make me grateful for your generosity?" Kane was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his wine glass. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "My father built Kane Industries from nothing. Started with a single truck and enough determination to kill a horse. By the time I was 10, he'd built it into a small but successful construction company." Kane's eyes focused on something beyond her shoulder, as if he was watching his past play out on the restaurant's expensive wallpaper. He believed in second chances, in helping people when they needed it most. He hired ex-cons, immigrants, who couldn't get work anywhere else, single mothers who needed flexible schedules. Sheila found herself leaning forward despite herself, drawn into the story by something in his voice she couldn't identify. "The company that destroyed your father's business was owned by a man named Robert Henley. Henley acquired that factory as part of a larger deal, closed it down to eliminate competition for his operations in the South. Didn't matter that it would put 3,000 people out of work. It was just numbers on a spreadsheet." The room seemed to grow smaller around them. Sheila's wine glass felt heavy in her hand. "My father tried to help the displaced workers by hiring as many as he could, even when we couldn't afford it. Extended credit to local businesses, delayed payments on contracts, mortgaged everything to keep people employed." Kane's smile was bitter as winter wind. "Robert Henley saw an opportunity. He orchestrated a series of lawsuits, tied up our assets, made sure we couldn't meet our obligations. Then he bought Kane Industries for pennies on the dollar when it went into bankruptcy." Sheila's stomach clenched. She was beginning to understand where this story was heading, and she didn't like the destination. "My father killed himself 2 days before the sale went through. Walked into his garage, started his truck, and went to sleep." Kane's voice remained steady, but something in his eyes suggested the cost of that steadiness. "I was 16. him when I came home from school. The restaurant's ambient noise faded to nothing. Sheila felt like she was drowning in the weight of his revelation. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be sorry. Be understanding." Kane finished his wine and set the glass down with careful precision. "Robert Henley taught me everything I know. About business? He taught me that mercy is a luxury only winners can afford, that sentiment is a weakness others will exploit, that the only way to protect the people you care about is to be more ruthless than everyone else. So you became him." Kane's laugh held no humor. "I became worse than him. Because I learned his methods, but I kept my father's heart." "Do you know what that combination creates, Miss MacDonald?" Sheila shook her head, afraid to hear the answer. "Monster with a conscience. Someone who destroys lives during business hours and loses sleep over it at night." Kane signaled for the check, his movements efficient and final. "Robert Henley died 5 years ago. Natural causes, unfortunately. But his company is now a subsidiary of Kane Industries. Every employee who lost their job when he closed that factory has been offered positions at twice their previous salary." The information hit her like a series of physical blows. Everything she thought she knew about Christian Kane was crumbling and reshaping itself into something more complex and far more dangerous. "The Santos family you mentioned in the elevator. You're living in a house I own in Westchester now, rent-free for the next 10 years. Kane stood, extending his hand to help her from her chair. Sometimes the only way to save someone is to hurt them first. As they left the restaurant, Sheila's mind raced with the implications of what she'd learned. Christian Kane wasn't the simple monster she'd imagined. It was something much worse. A man trying to do good through evil means. Someone who'd convinced himself that cruelty could be a form of kindness. The most terrifying part was that she was starting to believe he might be right. 3 weeks into working for Christian Kane, Sheila had developed a new understanding of hell. It looked exactly like a corner office with a view, and came with a salary that made her parents weep with relief. Kane was demanding in ways that redefined the word. He expected her to anticipate his needs before he voiced them, to translate his silences into action, to be present for conversations that could reshape entire industries. But it wasn't the workload that was killing her. It was the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. "The Morrison Industries file," Kane said without looking up from his computer screen. They were alone in his office at 9 p.m., the city sprawling beneath them like a constellation of ambition and broken dreams. Sheila handed him the folder, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact lasted maybe half a second, but she felt it like an electrical current running from her fingertips to places she had no business feeling anything. "You've been reviewing the acquisition details," he observed, still not meeting her eyes. "It's my job to understand your business dealings. Morrison Industries employs 1,200 people. I know." Kane finally looked at her, and she saw something in his expression that made her chest tighten. "The Louisville plant has been unprofitable for 6 years. Standard business practice would be to close it immediately after acquisition." Sheila's mouth went dry. She'd seen this movie before. How many people would lose their jobs? 437. The number hung between them like a death sentence. Sheila thought about the Santos family, about her father's hollow eyes when his customers stopped coming, about the promises Kane had made over dinner about being better than the monsters who'd destroyed his father. "But you're not going to close it." Kane's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Oh, but I am. Morrison Industries goes public with the acquisition tomorrow. Stock prices will soar when investors see our efficiency improvements. We'll make $40 million in the first quarter alone." Sheila felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "You're lying." "Never lie, Miss MacDonald. Lying requires caring enough about someone's feelings to preserve them." Kane stood and walked to his windows, his reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. "Did you really think I was some misunderstood hero? Some benevolent dictator playing a long game for the greater good? The Santos family? The factory workers you said you hired?" "All true. Carefully selected exceptions to prove I have a heart." Kane turned back to her, and his eyes held no warmth whatsoever. "Do you know what the most effective torture is, Miss MacDonald? It's not consistent cruelty. It's random kindness. Give someone hope, then take it away. Make them believe they matter, then prove they don't. Sheila's vision blurred at the edges. Everything she'd started to feel for him, every moment when she'd seen something human in his ice-blue eyes, had been calculated manipulation. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Because you called me a sociopath in front of witnesses. Because you made me feel small in that elevator. Because I wanted to see if I could make you care about me before I reminded you what I really am. Kane moved closer. Close enough that she could see her own reflection in his eyes. And I did, didn't I? Make you care? I saw it in the way you looked at me during dinner and how you stayed late every night this week, and the way you touch your throat when I walk into a room. She had been touching her throat, an unconscious gesture she'd developed whenever he entered her space, as if her body was trying to protect her heart from the impact of his presence. You're sick. Yes. I told you that on our first dinner. I'm a monster with a conscience, remember? Conscience is what makes the monster so effective. Kane's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper that had haunted her dreams. I wanted you to see what it felt like to believe in someone, to start caring about them, to think maybe there was something worth saving. And then I wanted you to watch while I proved there wasn't. Sheila backed toward the door, but Kane moved faster, his hand flat against the wood, trapping her between his arm and the wall. Don't you want to know the best part? His breath was warm against her ear. Tomorrow morning, when Morrison Industries stock hits its peak, I'm going to announce that we're not closing the Louisville plant. We're expanding it, creating 600 new jobs, investing $50 million in new equipment and worker training. She turned to face him, confusion replacing the hurt and anger.
What? The whole acquisition was designed to fail from the beginning. I've been bleeding money into Morrison Industries for months through shell companies, keeping them afloat just long enough to make this moment possible.
Kane's smile was different now, less predatory, more tired. 40 million in immediate profits, or 50 million invested in a community that reminds me of where my father grew up. Guess which one I'm choosing? Sheila's mind reeled as she tried to process the reversal. Then why tell me you were closing the plant? Oh, why hurt me like that? Kane stepped back, giving her space, but not freedom. Because I needed to know something about myself. I needed to know if I could hurt you, if I was capable of being the monster everyone thinks I am. And I am. His voice carried a weight of self-loathing that made her chest ache. But apparently, I'm not capable of living with it. Kane walked to his desk and pulled out a thick envelope, which he held out to her. Your severance. 6 months' salary and a letter of recommendation that will get you hired anywhere in the city. Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately. Sheila stared at the envelope without taking it. Why are you firing me? Because you were right about me in that elevator?
Ow.
I am insane.
And because I'm starting to care about you in ways that have nothing to do with revenge or manipulation or any of the sick games I play with people. Kane's voice cracked slightly on the last word. If you stay here, if you keep looking at me like I might be worth saving, I'm going to destroy you. Not because I want to, but because it's what I do. It's all I know how to do. Sheila reached for the envelope but didn't take it. Instead, she looked up into his eyes and saw something that stopped her breath. Genuine fear. Christian Kane, the man who bought and sold companies like poker chips, who made Fortune 500 CEOs sweat through their suits, was terrified. What if? I don't want to be saved from you. Kane's expression cracked open like ice under pressure. For one moment, she saw straight through to the 16-year-old boy who'd found his father dead in a garage, who'd built an empire from grief and rage and the desperate need to make sure no one could hurt him again. Then God help us both, he whispered. Sheila didn't take the envelope. Instead, she pushed past Kane to his desk and picked up the Morrison Industries file, flipping through pages of financial projections and employment statistics until she found what she was looking for. Shift supervisor. 2 kids, divorced, been with the company for 8 years. She looked up at Kane, who was watching her with something between fascination and terror. Marcus Rivera, maintenance worker. His daughter has leukemia. The company insurance is the only thing keeping her alive. Don't. James Patterson, quality control. 62 years old, 3 years from retirement. You think he'll find another job at his age? Sheila set the file down and walked back to Kane, stopping just close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat. These aren't numbers on a spreadsheet. They're real people with real lives hanging in the balance. Kane's laugh was hollow. You think I don't know that? You think I don't see their faces when I make these decisions? I've memorized every name, every family situation, every medical bill and mortgage payment and college fund that depends on Morrison Industries staying afloat. Then why the game? Why make me believe you were going to destroy them? Kane turned away from her, his reflection in the dark window, looking like a ghost of himself. Because I needed to know if you could still look at me the same way after you saw what I'm capable of. I needed to know if the feelings I'm developing for you are real or just another form of self-deception. The admission hung between them like a living thing. Sheila felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt the careful walls she'd built around her emotions crumbling like sandcastles at high tide. And what did you discover? Kane's reflection met her eyes in the window. I'm more terrified of you caring about me than I am of you hating me. Sheila moved to stand beside him at the window, both of them looking out at the city that had brought them together in the confined space of a broken elevator. Why? Because everyone I've ever cared about gets hurt. My father died because he cared more about other people than protecting himself. Every act of mercy I've shown has been used against me by competitors who see kindness as weakness. Kane's voice was barely above a whisper. If I let myself care about you, really care, I'll make mistakes. I'll hesitate at crucial moments. And in this world, hesitation kills not just you, but everyone depending on you. Sheila understood then what the real choice was. Good and evil, between the monster and the man. It was between safety and risk. Between protecting themselves and choosing to be vulnerable in a world that punished vulnerability without mercy. What if we're stronger together than we are apart? Kane finally turned to face her, and she saw raw longing warring with bone-deep fear in his expression. What if we're not? What if caring about you makes me weak enough that I can't save Morrison Industries? What if saving Morrison Industries requires sacrificing something else, someone else, and I'm too compromised by feelings to make the hard choice? Sheila reached up and touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw, the way he leaned into her touch despite himself. Then we'll make the hard choices together. We'll carry the weight of them together. You don't know what you're asking. Yes, I do. Sheila's voice was steady, certain in a way that surprised even her. I'm asking to stand beside the man who memorizes employee names and loses sleep over their families. I'm asking to help the boy who watched his father die trying to save everyone else. I'm asking to love the monster with a conscience, even when that conscience demands terrible things. Kane's breath caught. Love. The word scared her, but she didn't take it back. Love, messy, complicated, probably doomed love. The kind that doesn't make sense on paper but feels like the only truth in a world full of lies. Kane closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, something fundamental had shifted. If we do this, if we try this, there's no going back. You'll see me make choices that will keep you awake at night. You'll watch me hurt people to save other people. You'll have to live with the knowledge that your love might be the only thing standing between me and becoming exactly the monster everyone thinks I am. Sheila smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it felt completely real. And you'll have to live with the knowledge that someone sees all of that and chooses to stay anyway. Kane pulled her against him then, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that tasted like desperation and hope and the kind of surrender that required more courage than any victory. When they broke apart, both of them were shaking. The Morrison Industries. Announcement is tomorrow at 10 a.m., Kane said, his forehead resting against hers. Will you stand with me when I make it? Always. Kane pulled back slightly, studying her face as if memorizing it. Even when the choices get harder, even when there's no clear right answer? Sheila thought about her father's garage, about the night she'd found him crying over bills he couldn't pay. She thought about the Santos family and their children, about Sarah Chen and Marcus Rivera and all the other names in Kane's files. She thought about the boy who'd found his father dead and built an empire from grief. Especially then? 6 months later, Morrison Industries was thriving. The Louisville plant had expanded beyond even Kane's projections, becoming a model for sustainable manufacturing that other companies were scrambling to replicate. Sheila had been promoted to Director of Strategic Development, a position that didn't exist until Kane created it specifically for her. But success came with its own shadows. "The Riverside Hospital acquisition," Sheila said, setting the file on Kane's desk. They were in his office again, but this time she had her own chair, her own coffee mug, her own place in the ecosystem of his power. Kane didn't look up from his computer. Riverside serves the poorest neighborhoods in the city. Their emergency room sees more gunshot wounds and overdoses than anywhere else in Manhattan. It's also losing $2 million a year. I know. Sheila waited, but Kane continued typing. She'd learned to read his silences, to understand the weight of what he wasn't saying. Christian. He finally looked at her, and she saw the familiar war playing out behind his eyes. If we acquire Riverside, we can modernize their facilities, improve their equipment, attract better doctors, and we'll have to close 3 of their satellite clinics to make the numbers work. 1,200 people will lose their primary healthcare provider. There it was. The choice that had no right answer. The kind of decision that would haunt them both, regardless of what they chose. Sheila had learned that this was the real burden of power, not the ability to help everyone, but the responsibility to choose who to save. What does your gut tell you? Kane's smile was tired but genuine. My gut tells me to ask what my heart thinks. It had become their ritual, this dance between pragmatism and humanity. Kane made the calculations, ran the numbers, analyzed the data. Then he asked her to remind him of the cost in human terms, to help him weigh financial logic against moral imperatives. My heart tells me that the people who need those satellite clinics the most are the ones who can't afford to travel across the city for care. Sheila said, but it also tells me that if Riverside closes entirely, everyone loses. Kane nodded slowly. There's a third option, listening. Kane Industries absorbs the losses. We run Riverside at a deficit and make up the difference through our other holdings. Sheila felt her chest tighten. For how long? As long as it takes. It was insane. It was financially irresponsible. It was exactly the kind of choice that had destroyed Kane's father. It was also exactly why she loved him. The board will fight you on this. Kane's expression hardened into something that reminded her of the man she'd first met in that elevator. That night, they walked through Central Park as snow began to fall, transforming the city into something softer, more forgiving. Kane's hand was warm in hers, solid and real, in a way that still sometimes surprised her. Do you ever regret it? He asked suddenly, staying, choosing this life, choosing me. Sheila stopped walking and turned to face him. In the lamplight, with snowflakes caught in his hair, he looked younger, more vulnerable. Like the boy who'd needed saving and never quite believed he deserved it. Do you know what I regret? She said, reaching up to brush snow from his cheek. I regret that it took a broken elevator and a moment of pure rage to find you. I regret all the time we wasted before that moment. Kane caught her hand and pressed it to his chest, over his heart. Even knowing what it costs, even seeing what I have to do to protect the things we've built. Sheila thought about Sarah Chen, who'd sent a photo of her daughter's first day at her new school. About Marcus Rivera, whose daughter was in remission. In planning to study medicine, it's about the 437 people who still had jobs. Because a man everyone thought was a monster had chosen to be something more. Especially knowing that, Kane kissed her then, soft and reverent, as if she were something precious that might break under too much pressure. When they separated, his eyes held a peace she'd never seen there before. I love you, he said, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. I love you too. They walked home through the falling snow, two people who'd found each other in a moment of mutual destruction and chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage. Behind them, the city hummed with millions of lives intersecting and separating, each one carrying their own weight of choices and consequences. In the morning, there would be more files, more impossible decisions. More moments when they'd have to choose between competing versions of the greater good. But they'd face those moments together. Two monsters with consciences who'd learned that sometimes the most radical act of all is simply refusing to let the world's cruelty make you cruel in return. The snow continued to fall, covering their footprints, and creating a blank slate for whatever came next. Asterisk, subscribe for more intense storytelling, and hit the notification bell. Share your thoughts in the comments below, like if you enjoyed this emotional journey, and